Good evening, fellow conferees, professors, doctors, and everyone else who has joined us for this conference. My name is Owhorchukwu from Ignatius Ajuru University of Education, Rivers State, Nigeria. I'll be talking on my topic, which is the psychology of theocratic self-efficacy in Nigeria. In this work, I have developed, validated, and utilized a scale to measure the belief in a clerical political authority in Nigeria. I'll start with defining the concept theocratic self-efficacy. Now, this is two words or two concepts combined together: theocratic, and self-efficacy. And self-efficacy comes from Albert Bandura's concept in 1977. And then we are extending it into the religious political sphere. Now, this definition is gathered from the interview sessions that we have done involving journalists, religious adherents, and politicians. So operationally, we define theocratic self-efficacy as a cleric's belief in their capacity derived from spiritual authority to directly influence political outcomes, including elections, appointments, and governance, through prophetic declarations, prayer, and mobilization of their congregational base. So this is not just a theory, because we see it manifest in terms of prophetic declarations determining electoral success. We see it in the form of prayer interventions shaping governance, and also spiritual endorsement conferring power on candidates or parties. Now, the major problem here is that there are a lot of studies that have been carried out on political prophecy and statements in Nigerian Pentecostalism. But there hasn't been a quantification of these prophecies or statements. So this study seeks to quantify the belief in clerical political authority across denominations. And to do that, we have drawn 4 objectives. The first one is the study developed the theocratic self-efficacy scale, and then it found out if denomination influences the belief in a cleric's divine instrumentality. It finds out if there is a link or relationship between political prophetic networking and electoral spiritual authority. And finally, it seeks to find out if demographic factors such as age, gender, denominations can actually predict belief in a cleric's spiritual authority. Now, as I did mention quite earlier, this study extends Albert Bandura's self-efficacy theory into the religious political sphere. And that's the theory with which this study is anchored on. Now, to be able to do this, my colleagues would have talked about the method of data, the research design. We have utilized a mixed method research design, and specifically, we have the qualitative aspect, which has informed the quantitative aspect. So in a nutshell, the quantitative aspect fed from the qualitative aspect, which include discourse analysis and the thematic analysis. So what we have done is that we have, based on the interviews carried out and based on the 3 case studies, which was analyzed in the discourse analysis, we have been able to draw out statements that are linked to a cleric's being able to decide political outcome. And one of the key strands, which is consistent in our qualitative strand, is a divine instrumentality. And this is a belief in a cleric as a divine mouthpiece for political destiny. Now, these strands, we find it littered around in the discourse analysis, the thematic analysis. Specifically, we could see statements like, it's difficult to be president in this country without saying, go to Benin or talk to me. We've seen this in the discourse analysis, one of the case studies. And then thematic analysis, we've seen interviews statement like, yes, we have it, because we pray and see God's face and God is able to speak to us, who he has chosen to be our leader. So all these align to the core concept, divine instrumentality. And then another aspect of it is a political prophetic networking. Now we find that in the discourse analysis, where we have statements like, talk to me, nobody without this church. And then thematic analysis, where we have interview statements like, a pastor's declaration can make a great impact on either the success or failure of candidates. Now, this statement points towards the belief that a cleric is indispensable, as an indispensable spiritual consultant or gatekeeper. And then finally, we have the electoral spiritual authority, which is conceptualized as the belief in a cleric's ability to spiritually manipulate electoral outcomes. We see that in the discourse analysis, in one of the case studies, where there is a claim, there is a statement like, I will pray you out, you won't sit, I have all the powers. And then we see it in the interview, we see statements like, they can control political outcomes and they do exercise that very often. So the qualitative strands align with what we have conceptualized as electoral spiritual authority. That's a belief in a cleric's ability to spiritually manipulate electoral outcomes. And then with both components, we were able to generate items or statements for the questionnaire. And this is the 3 sections or sub-skills of the questionnaire, with responses on strongly disagree, disagree, neutral, agree, and strongly agree. Now for the methodology, it started with a literature review on Albert Bandura's theory, and then the case studies we've used for this study. And then we were able to generate 3 theoretical dimensions or sub-skills from the interviews, the interview guides, from the interview results, interview transcripts, and also the 3 case studies that were critically discussed. And then for the phase 2 had to do with item generation and expert validation. So 60 items altogether were generated that align to each of those 3 dimensions or sub-skills or components. So 20 items for each of the components, making a total of 60 items. And then these items were given to 5 experts for their review. And these 5 experts include professor in political science, a seminary theologian, a sociologist of religion, and 2 professors in my department, guidance and counseling, that specialize in measurement and evaluation. They were able to correct the statements or items or suggest corrections, modification, or elimination. And then finally, the content validity ratio, as well as the content validity ratio, was calculated for the 60 components. and 45 items were retained based on meeting the benchmark for this ratio and indexes. A pilot study was conducted by administering the questionnaire, the 45 retained items, to 300 congregants and general public via Google Forms and as well as hard copy formats. And then 292, which were well completed and which pertain to just Christians, were used for the final analysis. And then we'll look at the demographic profile of the respondents. We can see that it's a youthful respondents that are predominantly Pentecostal adherents. So this reflects the current Nigerian Christian demographics. And then for the results, we looked at denomination and instrumentality. And then we asked if there is a significant difference in belief in a cleric's divine instrumentality across denominations. So in a nutshell, we asked if the three denominations actually believe that the cleric can be able to decide electoral outcomes. And from our results, we see that on the grand mean, the average response across all the denominations or group show that they do not believe so. And then for the second question, which we sought to find an answer for, we try to see if there is a link between political prophetic networking and electoral spiritual authority. And then from the result of the analysis, the Pearson product moment correlation analysis, we see that there is actually a moderate positive relationship, and it's actually significant. So this implies that there is a link or there's a connection between the cleric acting as a political prophetic network and then also determining electoral success. And then finally, we try to see if demographic factors could predict theocratic self-efficacy. And then surprisingly, only gender predicts theocratic self-efficacy, which is quite different from what our qualitative analysis told us or proved to us. Our qualitative analysis actually proved to us that religious affiliation and age has something to do with belief in a cleric's ability to determine electoral outcomes. So this is quite a surprising findings. And then we conclude by saying that the TSC is a measurable construct with 3 validated dimensions, and that the belief in a cleric's gatekeeping ability are strongly linked to the belief in a cleric's electoral spiritual authority. So this means that there's a clear connection between both of them. So if the average congregant believe that the cleric can act as a spiritual gatekeeper, they would likely also believe that the cleric can act as electoral decider. And also we see that Pentecostal distinctiveness exists at leadership level. So we see that the Pentecostal make more of these pneumatic rhetorics, and but in terms of ordinary congregants, they do not believe that the cleric is able to determine electoral outcome. And then we see that from the quantitative analysis that gender actually matters when it comes to do with theocratic self-efficacy. Because when we look, a quick check on the mean response, see that female had a higher mean than the males. And then what does this imply? This implies that the skill can be used for future research on religion and politics. It helps to quantify the spiritual politics phenomenon in the global south and as well inform understanding of interfaith dynamics and political influence. Thank you for listening.